nice introduction and for the beautiful invocation, and thank everyone for coming here today, and also to the organizers for welcoming me here. I'm going to speak briefly tonight on the importance of Swami Vivekananda's message today, the 21st century. The period in which we live now, in many ways, is quite different from the late 1800s when Swami G came to America and taught, and then returned to India and also taught and established the Ramakrishna mission and continued his work until the end of his all too short time on earth in 1902. Many things have changed. India is now a free country, democratic country. It was under the control of the British Empire at that time. On the other hand, many things are very much the same. And if you read or hear about Swami G's life, including the nice video presentation we saw a moment ago, you can see a lot of themes. Swami Vivekananda, especially in his younger days as the young Narendranath, in many ways reminds me of a lot of you and a lot of my students, looking for meaning and purpose in life, being told on the one hand about science and reason and a certain rational outlook on the world, and at the same time inheriting a tradition and a religious belief, spiritual practice, and trying to sort all of that out. And so I think in many ways he's a figure that people today can really relate to, can really connect with, because his struggles are our struggles. They're really, in many ways, universal struggles. What I'd like to focus on, especially tonight, is certain aspects of Swamiji's famous first address to the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. It was briefly cited in the film that we just saw, and the entire text of it is actually in your program, so you can even follow along if you like, but it's also going to be on the screen. What you're going to hear is not an original recording of Swami Vivekananda's voice. If only Thomas Edison had been a little faster at inventing the phonograph, we might have gotten a recording of Swamiji's voice. It is not an actual recording of his voice. It created quite a stir, though, when it was circulated on the internet, because there were people who thought maybe it really was a recording of Swamiji. And it's been put together so cleverly with little pops and scratches that it sounds like it could be from that period. And so I'd like to bring a couple of things to your attention as you're watching this short reproduction of Swamiji's first speech. First of all, just the fact that might leap out to you at the introductory point of the film is that Swamiji's first speech in America was on September 11th, 1893. And of course that date, September 11th, has been burned into many of our minds now because of the event of that date in 2001. And a couple of striking things that I've noticed about Swamiji's speech and that date. And I don't really know what to do with this information. I don't have a theory for you as a professor or scholar of religion, but I'm just going to throw it out there for reflection. I'm still reflecting on it after several years of having it come to my attention. You know, the number 108 is a very significant number in Hindu spiritual practice, also in Buddhist and Jain spiritual practice. For example, if you are someone who meditates daily and has a mantra practice, it's likely that you recite your mantra in units of 108. You'll find in temples the number 108 used in many measurements. All throughout the textual traditions of the religions of India, you find the number 108 having significance. And it's exactly 108 years to the day between Swamiji's speech in 1893 and September 11th, 2001. And it is something that gives us pause, I think, because what you'll see is that Swamiji's speech is all about religious harmony. It's all about everyone coming together and realizing that there is a greater unity behind the diversity and difference that so often divides us. And there's a very explicit call at the end of his speech, and this is what's most striking if you kind of keep 9/11/2001 in the back of your mind, for an end to bigotry and hatred and fanaticism and the bloodshed they've unleashed upon the earth. And one almost gets an eerie sense that he was, through some yogic ability, seeing what was going to happen on that date many, many years later, 108 years later. I'm not making any such grand claims. I'm just reflecting upon this very interesting coincidence of numbers and Swamiji's message. Something else I'd like to bring your attention to, I'll say more about it as I continue my remarks after the film, but that thunderous ovation which he received when he got up and said, "Sisters and Brothers of America." I think just that short, "Sisters and Brothers of America," is one of the most profound statements ever made, because if you think of the time in which Swami Vivekananda lived, a couple of things should come to our attention. Again, India was a subjugated country at this time, and there was still even there is today, we've made a good deal of progress, but in those days there was even more racism. There was mention made in the film of how Swami Vivekananda was ridiculed. During his journeys, his travels in America, he could speak to a packed hall of people, pin drop silence, hanging on his every word. And then minutes later, after he would leave the hall, someone would try to kick him into the gutter because of racial bias. And here is this man from an ethnic group that was against which there was so much bias at that time in America, from a country that was subjugated, and he stands before this huge gathering and says, as an equal, "Sisters and brothers, I am one of you, I'm part of you." And the people understood. I think that's why the applause was so thunderous. Also, the order is interesting: sisters and brothers, right? Women first. And many of Swamiji's most devoted disciples were women. In fact, the main financial backers who made the beautiful mandir at Belur Math, the main temple at the headquarters of the Ramakrishna Mission, the main people who donated that were women disciples from the United States. And it's interesting to note that if you look in terms of history, Swamiji's speech is located almost midway between the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves in this country, and women's suffrage, women being granted the right to vote. He was, in many ways, a kind of nexus or nodal point in history where all these forces of progress were coming together. And I think that's one way to view Swami Vivekananda. So let's hear him in his own words and do what I like to do sometimes, which is, we know it's a reproduction, but just pretend that it really is a recording of Swami Vivekananda in 1893. And it has a very powerful effect. So let us hear this reproduction.
To the world's kindness of religion, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the afternoon session of the opening day today, the 11th of September, 1893. We now introduce you to Swami Vivekananda from India and request him to address us. Swami Vivekananda.
Sisters and brothers of America. It fills my heart with joy unspeakable to rise in response to the warm and cordial welcome which you have given us. I thank you in the name of the most ancient order of monks in the world. I thank you in the name of the mother of religions. And I thank you in the name of the millions and millions of Hindu people of all classes and sects. My thanks also to some of the speakers on this platform who, referring to the delegates from the Orient, have told you that these men from far-off nations may well claim the honor of bearing to different lands the idea of toleration. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of the earth. I am proud to tell you that we have gathered in our bosom the purest remnant of the Israelites who came to southern India and took refuge with us in the very year in which their holy temple was shattered to pieces by Roman tyranny. I am proud to belong to the religion which has sheltered and is still fostering the remnant of the grand Zoroastrian nation. I will quote to you, brethren, a few lines from a hymn which I remember to have repeated from my earliest boyhood, which is every day repeated by millions of human beings. As the different streams which men take through different tendencies, luminous though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to peace. The present convention, which is one of the most august assemblies ever held, is in itself a vindication, a declaration to the world of the wonderful doctrine preached in the Gita. Whosoever comes to me, through whatsoever form, I reach him. All men are struggling through paths which in the end lead to me. Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But their time is come, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or with the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal.
The speech that would change the world, right? Or we hope will yet change the world, because the full relevance, I would like to suggest, of Swami G's message has not yet been fully appreciated, fully realized. And of course, the events of 108 years after his speech and the things that have happened since, many of them bear that out. On the other hand, there has been remarkable human progress. The interfaith movement, which the Parliament of World Religions really inaugurated in many ways, has grown steadily through the years. And interestingly, if one looks at opinions of people, if you look at opinion polls that have been taken, especially in this country in recent years, some of the teachings of Swami Vivekananda that were viewed as very radical in his time are now increasingly mainstream. Some polls have suggested that as many as 60% or more of Americans agree with the proposition that many religions can lead to the eternal goal. This is very different from Swami Vivekananda's time, when the assumption of most people was that their own religion was the only way and that others were condemned. And of course, the sending of missionaries to India and other parts of the world was a big part of that effort to bring everyone into one religion. Swami Vivekananda, in many ways, is the Indian reply, specifically the Hindu reply to that cultural chauvinism, that no, in fact, here is an ancient tradition that has survived for thousands of years, not by being intolerant, not by insisting our way is the only way, but by practicing universal acceptance. And he gives very concrete examples. It was to India that many members of the Jewish community fled when they were persecuted during the Roman period. He mentions the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. And many of the Jewish people fled to India when the Zoroastrian tradition was persecuted in Iran a few centuries later. It was to India that many of the Zoroastrians fled and are now known as the Parsis in India. India was known for the idea of acceptance. And in fact, you can see evidence for this going back many thousands of years. For example, King Ashoka, one of the first rulers to really control pretty much all of what is now India today, and many additional territories besides, taught that dharma is something that involves respect for all paths, that one should not belittle or denigrate the path of another. And he practiced this as well. His preferred tradition for himself was Buddhism, and he put a lot of resources into promoting Buddhism. But we also know that he put many resources into the other traditions also, to the Jains and to the Hindus at the time. And this idea of acceptance has been pervasive in much of Indian history. And it's an idea that is now becoming global, and I would like to suggest that one of the key points at which this globalization of this idea of universal acceptance began to happen was this particular speech of Swami Vivekananda. This is really a key event that opened the doors to this way of thinking. And of course, it's not yet a universal way of thinking. We still have a long way to go, but it's much more widespread now than it was at one time. Something else that Swami Vivekananda did, which I think makes his thought very relevant today, is with regard to the Hindu tradition itself and to the Vedanta philosophy in particular. He presented this not as something parochial, not as something that was only for the people of India, though it was a point of special pride for the people of India, but it was something universal. And he allowed Westerners, he brought people like Margaret Noble, who became Sister Nivedita, into the fold and allowed them to take initiation. Many became monks and nuns of the Ramakrishna order, and this continues to the present day. The Ramakrishna order is an international order. Swami Abhiganananda, Stuart Maharaj, as many of us know him, was here just yesterday. A monk of the Ramakrishna order, but a person who grew up in this country and not of an Indian background. It was really Swami Vivekananda who opened the tradition up in this way in the modern period. It had been the case in ancient times also. There were people who practiced Hinduism in Southeast Asia. In Bali today, there's still an ancient Hindu community. But India had become closed over time because of repeated invasions, and Swami Vivekananda gave the country and gave the culture and the tradition a new confidence, and said, this is something that this tradition and these ideas are a treasure we can share with the whole world. Last couple of points I would like to make. Of course, the idea of acceptance I think is extremely important. He uses the word tolerance twice in this particular presentation, but in a later speech he actually rejects the idea of tolerance, in fact calling it blasphemy. He says tolerance means that I am allowing you to live, and who am I to say that I can allow you to live? And in this speech also he mentions tolerance in a positive way, but then he also hints that there's an even better idea, which is the idea of acceptance. He said we not only tolerate, but we accept all religions. And I think what you can find actually, if you really focus on Swami Vivekananda's thought, is a kind of threefold model of the possible ways we can respond to each other as human beings and as practitioners of different cultures and traditions. There is, of course, intolerance. He uses words like bigotry, fanaticism, hatred, and we don't want that. Tolerance is certainly superior to intolerance. But even tolerance is not the ideal. And some of you have, I think, heard me speak on this before. I will often ask my students, if you went back to your dorm room this evening and your roommate said, I tolerate you, would that be a compliment? You know, would you be happy to hear that you were tolerated? Tolerance sort of means that someone is not really that comfortable with you, but they're letting you live, right? They're not going to try to destroy you. Well, it's good they're not trying to destroy you, but it doesn't really lead to a truly happy life. And it also doesn't allow us to explore the richness of the world's religions, which is something that Swami Vivekananda very much wanted us to do. And throughout his talks, he always cites not only from the Hindu scriptures, but from Buddhism, from Christianity, from Islam, from Judaism, from Western philosophy. He wants us to have open minds. You can tolerate someone by ignoring them. You can coexist with someone by having no interaction with them at all. And so then you're not really learning from them. The ideal of acceptance is the highest ideal. You can see tolerance as a stepping stone, sort of a halfway house to the ideal of acceptance. And this is really where we should be, according to Swami Vivekananda, that if we have the practice of acceptance, then we are able to gain the full wisdom of the other and see how it can complement and be part of what we already have from our own background, our own tradition, our own way of thinking. Finally, I would like to mention another universal aspect of Swamiji's thought, which I made reference to right before the film. The fact that in so many ways, so many of us can connect with him as seekers. He found himself caught between, like I said, faith and reason, the ancient tradition that he had inherited and the scientific rationalistic outlook that he was receiving in his schooling. And many of us have this kind of experience. In fact, one of my good friends in the Ramakrishna tradition, there's a nun named Sister Gayatri Prana, Prabhajika Gayatri Prana, and she once said something about herself that I could also identify with, and maybe many of you can as well. She said, I'm too scientific for most religious people, and I'm too religious for most scientific people. And I suspect Swami Vivekananda would relate to that as well. I think one of the most powerful things that Swamiji represents in addition to this idea of universal acceptance, is the idea of a third way or a middle path in the ongoing war between religion and science, or faith and reason, or however you want to characterize that conflict. There are, you could say, two types of clash of worldviews. There are the clashes among the religions, especially if the religions are being conceived in a fundamentalist way, a very rigid, closed, and fanatical way. Then their differences will be seen as irresolvable, and the only solution is to fight. And so that's what so often happens. And then you have the clash between religion in general, religion as such, and a more purely rationalistic or empirical outlook. Very often people will move to that purely empirical outlook precisely because of all the fighting that's happening in the name of religion. It's a reasonable thing to say, well, maybe this religion business is just more trouble than it's worth. And there are many people who believe that. And so increasingly, I think many of us find ourselves torn between adherence to a very fundamentalist kind of religion, or a completely materialist, completely empirical and rational point of view with no space for anything like soul or afterlife or divinity or any of the kinds of things that we find in the world's religions. And many of us find those two alternatives both inadequate. I recall the line from Shakespeare, I think it's from Romeo and Juliet. One of the characters says, "A plague on both your houses." This is how I sometimes feel when I hear religious people and non-religious people fighting with each other. Because what we really need is something that is rational, that is consistent with science, with our best knowledge, and that fulfills our spiritual aspirations and does not leave us looking at a universe that is devoid of meaning, devoid of ultimate purpose, and that really says to the vast majority of people who've suffered throughout history, well, that was your one lifetime and that's it. You have no other aspiration, nothing else to look forward to after that. The way that I think Swami Vivekananda offers, it goes beyond those two alternatives that we so often find ourselves stuck between. So I think his thought is tremendously relevant to our times and to the contemporary world, in some ways perhaps even more so than to his own time. That you can see his thought almost like a seed that is just beginning to germinate today. And there may yet other be possibilities in the future that we've not yet envisioned, where other levels of depth in his teaching will become evident. So you could spend forever studying Swami Vivekananda. And it's been a privilege to speak with all of you on this celebration of his 150th birth anniversary. And I thank you, and you can have some, if there's anyone would like to ask questions, or if there's a little time for discussion, we can do that. But thank you very much. Yeah, there's a question.
Yeah, I have one question. It's a whole lot of intellectualism is involved, all this preaching. 150 years have gone. How it is not filtering into an ordinary way of preaching, so that a rickshaw in the street understands what is Hinduism is all about? And that's the one of the what at least me it looks like that's one of the drawbacks of this way, as against evangelism. Evangelists go out and they preach Jesus Christ's ways in a way that people can understand and get. So does Islam. Where does this come down to the small guy in the street, that he can understand what's the difference between him and the statue that erected all over the country?
I think that's a wonderful question, and I think there are two aspects of it. Did everyone hear and understand the question? How does sort of an ordinary person who's not, college educated and reading the complete works of Swami G, every day for, enjoyment, how someone who's spending their time working for a living appreciate a philosophy like this? One aspect, I think, enables me to mention something that I neglected to speak on in my remarks, but I think it's the other pillar, you could say, of Swamiji's teaching, which is the practical Vedanta, the idea of karma yoga, the idea that one essential thing that those of us need to do who want to follow this philosophy is not only to talk and think about it or practice meditation or study books, but to also go out and, as Swamiji said, worship God in the most noble form of all, which is the suffering human being. And so I think one of the best ways to communicate the ideals of Vedanta to especially the poor is to put our, as we say in America, our money where our mouth is, to go and reach out to people and try to make their living conditions as best as possible. And in fact, Swami Vivekananda, in one of his speeches, sounds very angry, in fact. He says, how dare you, I'm not sure who he's addressing, he says, how dare you go and teach Vedanta to people who are starving, who are suffering? He says it's an insult, it's a blasphemy to do so. Give them food, teach them to read, give them education, a decent life. And then he says, let them make their own destiny. So I think this active side of Vedanta also needs to be emphasized. You also mentioned Christianity and Islam, and I think one of the other important aspects of Vedanta to emphasize is that while it can become very intellectual, we can't ever forget Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda's master, and the idea of bhakti, the idea of pure devotion, the idea of a very immediate emotional connection with the divine is, I think, part of the appeal of traditions like Christianity and Islam. And I think that if we neglect that dimension of Vedanta as well, it's to the detriment of Vedanta. If we become excessively, if we're all jnana yogis and there's no room for bhakti, then that won't appeal to most people. So I think the bhakti yoga and karma yoga would giving proper emphasis to those, I think, would be a big part of responding to what you described. Any other questions? Okay, well, we have another speaker, so I will move aside. Thank you all very much.